order to have days like this, you're going to have days like this. This is Tips on Tuesday. We're going to talk about what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. Stay tuned so you don't feel like doing this. If you like these videos, please subscribe and give us a like. And if you have anything to add to the conversation or any questions, please leave them below.
So are we sitting the right distance apart, or do we need to come in closer, or what do you think?
I just want to get as close to you as I can.
I
big guy.
knew that. I'm okay with it.
You really? All right, let's do it. All right. So we're sitting here with Adam Parsons. He's one of those big captains of those big ships. And Adam, can you introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
Yeah, well, I'm a commercial vessel master. I've been sailing for 41 years, 22 of that as master on a variety of ships, oil tankers, passenger vessels. Recently, the last 12 or 13 years as captain on a high-speed catamaran, so 350 feet, 900 passengers, 250 vehicles, 35 knots that operate out of Okinawa in the Far East, and we run to Japan, Korea, Philippines, Thailand, Singapore.
So you told me one story that was really funny one time. You were taking that boat through the Panama Canal, and the port captain got on board.
Pilot. Right.
He got on board, and he goes, "Adam, you know this ship?" So it's like, "You take it through." And he just sat back, and he just...
That's true. We were doing a nighttime transit, and we had cleared Gamboa signal. We're going through the cut into Gatun Lake, and he said, "Open it up." And I said to the pilot, "Are you sure?" He says, "Oh yeah, no problem." And so we took it up about 85%. We were doing about 35 knots. And going through the canal, which is awfully narrow, as many of your viewers may know, it was just like flying an airplane way low down a runway. And that lasted for about 15 minutes, and the radio broke out in very agitated Spanish, and he quickly asked us to slow down. So we think he might have gotten in trouble for that, but it was a fun experience for just being a transiting vessel.
How long did it take you to get through the Panama Canal that time?
That, like most ships, you're scheduled. The normal transit for us is about 10 hours. Yeah, because you're waiting at the locks. You still have to anchor. So the transit from the south to north was real quick, but you waited at either end.
All right. So what I wanted to convey to the viewers of this video is sailing with the big boats and the small boats in the same vicinity, and from a big boat point of view, what do we need to do as small boats to coincide comfortably with the bigger boats?
Sure, this is a great opportunity to give your viewers an idea of what the watch-standing officer on a large ship is thinking, and kind of their world, because it's awfully hard to understand unless you've been on a large ship. So the first thing I would convey is that most small boats are darn near invisible to us, even with the best radar systems in average sea conditions. We detect small boats, and by small boats I'm thinking 30 to 60 or 70 foot fiberglass construction. We see them anywhere between 1 and maybe 4 miles on a radar. Now, I know I know your boat, you have AIS on there,
right,
as large commercial ships do, but by and large, the watch officer is not looking at the AIS. Some ships have integrated navigation systems where the AIS data shows up on the radar or on the ECDIS, but many do not. And of the ships that do, there's a lot of crews that don't know how to operate it. And so that data may be there. If I was on a small boat and there's lots of big ships around, I would just assume that no one sees me. So that's one aspect of it. The another aspect is that, another thing to keep in mind is that during the day on a large commercial ship, there is usually just one watch-standing officer. Rules of the road require that you have a dedicated lookout. Not so much. The thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of rules and regulations and equipment requirements that apply to big ships, and a lot of those are not followed. It's unfortunately the commercial shipping business, especially internationally, is a race to the bottom, and so they're using the lowest paid crew on the least equipped ship that they can get away with. Operating as cheaply as possible. Equipment may be broken and not repaired, and until they come into a port that does port state inspection and requires them to fix it, it may go months and not be repaired. So just because the ship is required to have the equipment and training doesn't mean that it exists. During the day, like I started to say, during the day, that the large ship may just have one person on watch who's the navigation officer, but he may be doing a lot of other tasks. He may be correcting charts, he may be doing voyage planning, he may be talking to the other officers about the day's work, so not all of his attention is focused outside the port lights. So again, just because there's someone up there doesn't mean that they're looking for you. So again, small boat, beware.
So we were talking over dinner, and you had mentioned the bigger balls theory, and how the boats, are talking to each other, saying, I have right of way, and you have right of way, but they may hit each other and be talking at the same time.
Right. So let's assume that the large ship sees your sailboat, and he knows you're there. There's a lot of potential pressure on that watch officer to not do the right thing. Rules of the road, everyone knows. Power-driven vessels have to keep out of the way of the sailing vessels as long as the power-driven vessel has the room to maneuver. All right. So one of the things you want to keep in mind as a small boat sailor is, especially if you're in a narrow waterway, and that's a narrow waterway as defined by the large ship, not the small vessel. So you might be in a roadstead where it looks like there's plenty of sea room for your small boat, but there might be just a narrow channel that large deep draft ship can navigate in. They can't maneuver. Of course, the rules cover that in the narrow channels where small boats, even sailboats, have to stay clear of large vessels in a narrow channel like that. So know where you are, know the limitations as it applies to deep draft vessels, and by deep draft, sometimes we mean 70 or 80 feet. Some of these large tankers will draw that much water, so it's a little different world. That said, that watch officer may see your small boat, but he might not necessarily want to maneuver for it, especially if there's a lot of small boats. And it's not so much sailing boats, but it's fishing boats. Fishing vessels, like sailing vessels, that have the right of way under the rules, but there's so many of them. The reality of it is, for the most part, the fishing vessels keep out of the way of the large vessels, just because it becomes too onerous on the large vessels to continually zigzag around the numerous small vessels. Sailing vessels, in the view of a large ship watchstander, are just like fishing vessels. They're a nuisance, they're in the way, they may move for you, they may not. Depending on the nationality of the watchstander, there's a machismo that exists among sailors, and that's bigger with some national backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds than others, and they just might not want to move just because they figure they don't have to. Keep in mind that you may be completely be in the right and have the rules of the road on your side, but if there's a collision, small boat will be the loser. The guy driving the big boat knows that. Right? Another factor to think of is that again, in the race to the bottom in the commercial shipping business, you often have different nationalities, several nationalities of crew aboard one vessel. So you may have the captain may be one nationality, the watchstanders may be another, the unlicensed crew may be a third or fourth or fifth nationality. Many times, and we see this on our vessel when we operate in those waters, many times the watch standing officer is not permitted to come off the pre-planned navigation track without calling the captain to do so. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but you don't know what that watchstander's day has been like. He may be in trouble with the captain for something that happened earlier in the day that had nothing to do with navigation. But if he's meeting you at 11 o'clock or at midnight, 11 o'clock at night or at midnight, he may be very hesitant to call the captain to make that course change. Most ships in the master's stateroom has a heading repeater or sometimes an ECDIS display, and the master knows when a course change occurs. So it's not like that watch officer can sneak it around him and do the right thing. Master wants to be called. Mate may be afraid to call the master, and he's not going to change for you. We've seen it on our ship many times. We've had other ships call us on the radio and beg us to turn so that they don't have to, because he doesn't want to wake up the captain. So,
did you turn?
Of course. We didn't have a collision. So just for the lesson to learn there is, your goal is not to get run over by a big ship. If that requires you to turn or tack or jibe or whatever other inconvenient thing it is you have to do that you really don't want to do, think of what the consequences are if you don't. Because that other person, even though he's required to, even though he should, he just might not.
Thanks. About 3 or 4 years ago, there was a boat that broke up in the Caribbean. And I called you probably a week later, and I go, would you have taken off? And you said, no, I wouldn't have gone. And I asked you, I said, so you wouldn't have gone, but what if the boat owner says you got to go? And then you said to me, I have so much experience and so much seniority. When I say what happens, it happens.
I'm lucky enough to be at a point in my career, the end of it, where if you get an owner or an operator that wants you to do something that's illegal or unethical or something you think is safe, I can say no, because I can get fired and it doesn't make a big difference in my life. Okay? One of the things that people need to realize is that the ship captain, the ship master, is the one who's required to operate the ship responsibly and protect the vessel, the crew, the environment, and the other vessels around him. That doesn't mean he can't get fired for doing that. And it's a problem in our industry in that the regulatory powers don't recognize or don't acknowledge the power that a ship owner or operator has over the master, just economically. That guy, like anyone else, has a mortgage to pay and a family to feed, and he wants to keep his job. And because of that, and this is especially true with crews from we say third world countries, lower economic or less economic chances to get ahead in life. A shipping job's a good job. You don't want to lose it, and you'll bend or break a lot of rules to keep that job. Right? Americans, not so much. British are good. Japanese are good. There's a lot of nationalities where the masters take their job seriously and will say no or stand up to an owner or operator, but there's a lot of seafarers who won't. And so again, your perspective from the small boat vantage point is to don't assume that the crew on that big ship is going to do the right thing.
And one of the things that you talked about a little while ago was, they want to save fuel. They don't want to make that turn. And if you're in the way, they expect you to make that turn. And as a little guy, like Adam was saying, you got to make the turn because your life's at stake. There's aren't.
Right. The chances are that if you're in a small boat and you get run over by a big ship, they will probably never know who did it, especially if you're out in open ocean. It's not that they're trying to run people over. It's either one, they don't detect the vessel is there, or two, they are under economic or local internal ship politics pressure not to turn, or if they do, they'll miss you by the minimum amount possible. You go on a regular U.S. ship, ones that operate deep sea, and the normal standing orders are 2-mile CPA, closest point of approach, for other vessels, especially at night. Sometimes that's shortened down to 1 mile or 1.5 miles during the daytime. You go to the Far East, and 100 feet is as good as 1 mile, and that's what they'll give you if they move at all, and they do expect you to move, because there's a perception out there. It's a bias among a lot of merchant crews or merchant officers that they're out there to make a living. They have to be there. They don't necessarily want to be there. It's like they're at their factory and they're going to work. They see the sailing community as just people playing out there and basically getting in the way of commerce. Is that a fair assumption? No, but that bias exists in that community.
I know that fire is one of the big issues on a boat, and I've often said that's the only thing that will really sink us. As long as I do everything right, a fire, God forbid, is the only thing that can sink Aquarius. But talk a little bit about fires, because you've been through all the training, and everything. What are the important things that we know about fires?
That the absolute best way to put out a fire is to prevent it, right? On small boats, you've got fuels on board, you've got electrical distribution systems on board. On big ships, those are the two things that threaten us most, is either fuel oil or getting where it's not. In your case, sometimes alcohol or propane is a source, and electrical fires. Ships and boats live in a corrosive environment. Terminals corrode, wires corrode. As you know, as an electrical engineer, add resistance, you get heat, and you start having potential sources of ignition. The big thing on a boat is batteries. Maintain your batteries, make sure they're secure. If you can get away from wet cells, absolutely do so. They're sealed batteries are a whole lot safer. Keep your terminals clean, maintain that system. The other thing is, on big ships, in addition to going to extensive schools for firefighting, advanced firefighting, basic safety training, medical training, I train for half of my vacation time each year. The small boats can do the same thing. Set yourself up a fire drill with with your crew, or even if you're just two-handing, or even if you're solo sailing, make yourself your own drill. Where, okay, if I have a battery catch on fire, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to put it out with? How are we going to electrically isolate it? Same thing. If we get a galley stove fire, how are we going to secure the fuel source? How do we extinguish that fire? How can I compartment my vessel as much as possible? Same thing for, do you have bungs for all your through hull fittings? In a location, you get it with the right tool to put it in place. Do you have damage control availability? Can you quickly put a tarp over the side to initially seal a hull breach from a container or a log or something that you come into contact with? So you can pre-plan these scenarios, and even just the fact of pre-thinking, writing down the steps or the options of what you do, puts you in the mindset that it happens, and of course it will always happen at 2 a.m. during rough seas, on a cold, rainy night. Having pre-thought these steps will help you deal with it better if and when it ever happens.
If you like this video, give us a like down below and click here to subscribe. That really helps us. And if you want to watch more of us, click one of those.